It's time to celebrate Valentine's Day again. And now, the allegedly true story of one family's Valentine tradition that strangely involves Dogman. Dogman Valentine's Day Horror, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. This story did not happen to me, but my parents claim it happened to them. Every year on Valentine's Day when I was a kid, we would gather by our fireplace and our parents would tell me and my sister the story of how our family was almost wiped out before it started by a dog man. Although this is a pretty scary story, we kids would look forward to it each year. To us, Valentine's Day was almost like a second Halloween. But my parents weren't really telling us about all this to entertain us. I suppose their intention was to present some sort of moral or historical lesson or something. Either way, what we took out of it was that we liked scary stories, and this one starred our parents. So, the story happened way back when my parents were dating, before they'd gotten married. They were both teenagers, and it was the late 50s. Specifically, it was Thursday, February 14th, 1957. They remember because that year, the full moon fell on Valentine's Day. You can look it up. Mom and Dad celebrated Valentine's Day by doing what all the teenagers in the monster movies back then were doing. Driving around, trying to find a lover's lane that was secluded enough to have their own private observance of the holiday. Maybe those old movies were based on fact. Maybe monsters are somehow attracted to lovers' lanes. On the other hand, maybe cryptids are seen on Lover's Lane for the simple reason that these places are, by definition, located so far off the beaten track. Either way, my parents were driving around on dark roads looking for a place they could park without attracting any attention. This was the part of the story where my sister would giggle and yell out that they were looking for a place to kiss, and I would say, "Ew," and make gagging sounds. We all had our parts to play in the telling of the story, kind of like the audience at Rocky Horror. My father would go into long, intricate detail, describing what was wrong with each different lover's lane they checked out. One had too many cars parked there. The next had Dad's main rival's car parked there. The third actually had a police vehicle drive past and briefly set off its siren at them to get them to move on. They were heading further and further out of town and getting increasingly frustrated. Finally, my mother said she was hungry and asked if they could stop for something to eat. Passing a burger joint, they decided to stop in. It was one of those old 1950s places where ladies on roller skates would bring the food out to your car instead of you going inside. In the summer, they would attach the trays to the outside of your car window, but on this frigid night, they just brought them their food in a brown paper bag. Mom says they were listening to romantic songs on the radio. I looked up what was on the charts that week, and the number one hit was Young Love, First Love, sung by Tab Hunter. I can imagine that's a song they had to have heard that night. There's no doubt it would have been at the top of the rotation. In fact, the same song was also simultaneously number 3 on the charts as performed by Sonny James. So it was a night for young love, and my parents were the living embodiment of the zeitgeist. They were the archetype of that moment in time, yet even with all that intense mythology on their side, in reality, they sat there sucking down shakes and wondering how they could find some privacy. So while my parents were eating in the parking lot, they noticed mountains looming off in the distance behind the fast food restaurants and the highway. They decided to try to figure out how to get up in those mountains. There would certainly be some private spot up there that they could stop at, and so, after eating, off they went in that general direction using local roads. Every place they would go for the rest of this journey was a place that neither of them had been before. It was dark, and the roads were dimly lit. Mom says she started to regret their decision almost as soon as they started. They were no longer driving on the highway. They were now going through some pretty desolate parts of a town they didn't even know the name of. Every so often they would see a person just wandering around, looking like they had no place to go. "Maybe they're going to the mountains," Mom said to Dad. She said she was pretty scared to be there, and Dad said she was starting to get him scared too. Nevertheless, onward they drove. On and on and on, until Dad says he had not seen a human, wandering aimlessly or otherwise, for over 10 minutes. They were traveling through undeveloped forest on a tiny 2-lane road. There hadn't been any buildings for a few minutes. Dad found a patch of grass over by some trees alongside of the road and pulled off. He turned the car lights off to lessen the chances that any cops passing by would notice them there. And then the two of them just sat there. "We looked around a lot nervously," Mom told us. "It was cold and I was shivering," Dad remembered. Dad moved closer and put his arm around Mom. She moved in close to him, but she says it was more to warm herself up than anything else. Having invested so much time and effort into finding this private spot, neither of them wanted to give up and leave, but on the other hand, neither of them felt secure enough to stop watching the road and forest for even a second. "There was something about that place that made you feel like you weren't alone," according to Dad. In time, they began to relax and started cuddling. In the cold of the night, the windows were soon fogged up on the inside. That's when they heard a banging on the left rear car door. "Drive!" shouted my mother. "The car ignition is off," my father reminded her. "Then start it," she insisted. "But what if it's a cop?" my father asked. Then they heard a loud bang, but from the right rear door. "The police don't bang on the back of your car," said my mother as my dad turned the key and started the car. Well, almost. But he tried again. And again. While he was trying to start the engine, Mom grabbed the cloth and wiped the windshield clear so they could at least see out of the front of the car. That's when they first saw it. It wasn't a cop. It wasn't a homeless person. It was a monster. There was some sort of hairy monster standing there, silhouetted against the full moon out through the fogged-up window. Although they could not yet make out much detail, it was certainly not a police officer or even a human being. Its hair or fur blew in the wind, and it had tall, pointed ears. The next thing they knew, it loudly threw itself face first on their car hood and slammed its muzzle right into the front windshield. It acted as though it had never been exposed to glass before, as it kept trying to bite them through the glass and grab them with its massive hands. Both Mom and Dad agreed that it had giant hands but with very short fingers. Then, a terrible, squeaking, screeching noise coupled with deep cracks appearing in the windshield told them that the stubby fingers ended in long, hard, sharp nails. Or maybe a more appropriate word would be claws. The thing had impossibly hard and sharp claws, Dad told us. When I saw how deep the scratches were that it was leaving in the front windshield, I got the impression that they would be able to break into the car eventually if it kept trying. And try it did. My mother screamed, and my father says he probably did too, as the monster, which had a kind of nightmare demon dog face, literally tried to bite through the glass and eat them both alive. Slobber was everywhere as the monster went completely insane, slamming its hands and kicking its feet. It bit off the car's aerial antenna and the radio station turned to static. Unsuccessful at getting the glass to open for it, the monster ran around to the back of the car and attempted to open the trunk. Then it jumped up and down on the trunk, which bent the center of it and raised the edges on the outside a bit. Using this space to thrust its huge nails in, the beast tore open the car's trunk. It then flung everything that had been inside, including the spare tire, all over the side of the highway and even in the road itself. My mother says she herself was turning the key in the ignition now, weeping so much that she could hardly see what she was doing. The creature ran loudly over their car, down the windshield, down the hood, jumped on the ground, and turned to glare at them with hatred. In the moonlight, they finally got a good look at the thing. It was the tallest man either of them had ever seen, but it did not wear clothing like a man. It had the head of a dog and the hands of a monster. It was entirely covered in hair or fur that was either black or at least very dark. And then this thing roared. Dad said his hands and feet were shaking so much that he wasn't sure he was hitting the gas or the brake, but he just kept trying to start the car in the cold over and over again. Then the monster struck its massive hands underneath the front end of the car and started to lift it in the air. The car was up to its chin when suddenly a miracle happened, like a miracle from out of an ancient scripture. The car started. The car, which was a then 11-year-old 1946 Cadillac that Dad had rebuilt himself from scrap, was rear-wheel drive, so it lurched forward quickly and unexpectedly. The Dogman was bent backwards as they drove over it. The car bumped repeatedly and side to side as they drove forward, then away from the scene. Neither of them looked back, they just drove. Like I said, this was an old car and it had just taken a beating. Dad noticed the brakes were not responding correctly, and he said he was going to have to pull off the road and check them out. Mom begged him to keep driving, but the brakes were barely working at all and the car wouldn't make it back home in this shape. After a few minutes of driving, when they felt certain they had gotten safely away from the monster, Dad started coasting the car to a halt along the side of the highway. Then he got out and opened the hood. He could see the car was leaking all kinds of fluid, but wasn't sure what he could really do to fix it, since his toolkit was now thrown around on the road, back there. Dad walked over to Mom's window, and they talked about their options. This was the days before cell phones, and they were either going to have to walk or they were going to have to try to drive in this car with brakes that were in the process of dying. Suddenly, their decision was made for them as they heard from the distance behind them the unmistakable roar of the Dogman. Dad says he could see it back in the direction they had come from. It was standing on its hind legs, and it was running. It was limping, but it was still running. Dad said that even injured, that thing could have easily won a gold in the Olympics. He got back in the car and he hit the gas pedal. Mom says she screamed non-stop as Dad tried to speed out of the forest on icy roads lit only by the full moon, with no brakes to slow down on turns. She says they drove for a half hour, with the Dogman always the same distance behind them. Dad says it was probably more like 4 or 5 minutes, but every second felt like an hour, because time slows down when you think you're going to die. Inevitably, Dad eventually turned left when he should have turned right, or maybe he just hit a bad patch of ice. One way or another, the car spun out of control, and it was all Dad could do to arrest its momentum by slamming sideways into a tree. The right back of the caddy was now wrapped around the tree. Even if he could get the engine started again, he'd never get the car to move from that spot. So he climbed out and helped Mom do the same. Looking back, they could see the monster Dogman heading toward them. It was close enough that they could hear its hoarse, labored breathing. Dad says he grabbed Mom's hand and pulled her with him off the road and into the forest. She asked him why they were going in that direction, and Dad said there was a police station on the other side of this patch of woods. Mom remembered there were also all those scary-looking people out wandering aimlessly back in that direction as well. It was one of those frying pan or fire choices. Dad wasn't sure he was doing the right thing, but he knew they had to keep moving. So, into the forest they went. Mom kept slipping in her high heels on ice patches and ripped her skirt when she fell on a rock. Her knee was bleeding and she was crying, so Dad tried to carry her for a while. He was no athlete, and they had to keep stopping so he could catch his breath. Mom recovered a bit from her shock, tore some cloth off her hem, and wrapped it around her knee. She wanted to try walking on it herself, and so they continued toward the police station. Emerging from the trees, they realized they had made it back to the Skid Row area on the edge of town that they didn't know the name of. Mom says that the situation failed to normalize and got even more dreamlike. The two of them stepped into some sort of deep, wet mud. Mom's shoes remained in the mud behind her as she stepped out of them before realizing what she had done. Essentially, the same thing happened to my father, and now they found themselves out in the cold on a February night in their stocking feet, completely stuck in deep mud up over their ankles. Now, this part of the story would always set my mother off into a rant. She wanted to know how it would be possible for this deep, wet muck to even exist there on a night when all surface water was frozen. She slipped on ice, hurting herself several times, so how could she now be stuck in mud? Mud is made of water, and all the water that night had turned to ice. Mom doesn't like illogical things. It can exist and be part of her life, holding her feet in the ground, yet she will still refuse to accept. There's nothing reality could throw at my mother that she couldn't disagree with and rant about. Mom saw one of the aimless people who scared her earlier. She was so desperate, she waved to him and called out for help. He observed her through zombie-like eyes and then began shambling over toward the two of them. Dad says he felt his heart leaping out of his chest. He could see the police station right there, but he couldn't make a move toward it, being stuck in the mud with a shambling zombie approaching them from the front and a Dogman monster limping up from the rear. They were going to die within view of the police station on Valentine's Day night. Then, the strangest thing happened. The zombie man's eyes opened wide, and he stared in shock at something behind them. They didn't have to guess what it was. Then, an even stranger thing happened. Instead of running away, the man ran toward them, grabbing them both and helping them extricate their feet from the impossible mud. Wordlessly, the three ran toward the police station as behind them the forest erupted with the noise of an immense beast hurling itself at its human prey. Then there was a big squishing sound as the monster sank deep, deep inside the mud, way up over its knees. Dad says he turned and saw the monster absolutely freaking out, flailing this way and that, and mud flying in every direction. He realized the mud wouldn't hold the monster indefinitely, so they made it inside as quickly as they all could manage. Inside, the local gentleman helped them explain the situation to the officer on duty, who treated them as if they were mud-covered lunatics. First he called someone over to lock up their rescuer for being drunk. Then the two of them got locked up in separate cells so that their parents could be called. Hours later, both families regrouped at the station. Mom and Dad were each on good terms with their parents, who were more concerned that they were covered in mud and lost their shoes than anything the police were telling them. By the time they got outside, they could see the monster was long gone. Had the police ever believed them enough to go look to see if the monster was there? They never found out. This event led to my parents taking their lives more seriously. Dad borrowed money from Grandpa to get Mom a ring the next day, and their adult lives began immediately thereafter. "It's a great thing to be childlike," Dad would always tell us sagely, "but that was the day when we stopped being childish." "All our dreams could have ended that night," Mom told us. "There might never have been a you and a you," she would say each year, touching us on the nose and making eye contact. That is why, whenever times got a little tough when we were kids, Mom or Dad would say, "It's still better than it might have been." We knew what they meant. Our parents could have been killed by Dogman, and we might never have had a chance to live at all. So, for our family, Valentine's Day was and is always a reminder to appreciate whatever you have, because it always could have been much worse. And to always love the people in your life, because you never know how much longer you'll have them to love. And these were lessons taught by the harshest instructor of all. These were lessons taught by Dogman.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.